when it spread to the West, or Westerners became aware of Buddhism, they really didn't have any context in which to categorize who the Buddha was. There was, in terms of religions, the Western religions were theistic, so there was God, and there was ordinary human beings. And they would, one of the ways they would characterize who the Buddha was as an Oriental Christ, or as a, God incarnate. So welcome everyone to Dharma Night. My name is Amarapuspa, and tonight we're following a theme that I'm calling three approaches to understanding the Buddha. And it's kind of loosely following the theme we've had the last few months, following Sangharakshita's book, The Three Jewels. But I wanted to hone in more about a particular teaching that I find really helpful. I personally chose this because I found it really inspiring and helpful way of understanding who the Buddha was, and I guess what the Buddha principle is, because there are two things, or Buddhahood, there are two things. So through different perspectives, there's been a lot of bafflement about the Buddha. So we have the historical Buddha who lived over 2,500 years ago, and then from that sprang this Eastern, at a certain point, Eastern religion that spread to many countries. And when it spread to the West, or Westerners became aware of Buddhism, they really didn't have any context in which to categorize who the Buddha was. There was, in terms of religions, the Western religions were theistic, so there was God, and there was ordinary human beings. And they would, one of the ways they would characterize who the Buddha was as an Oriental Christ, or as a, God incarnate. But even in the Buddha's lifetime, the historical Buddha's lifetime, so he started out as Siddhartha Gautama, and then he became enlightened, he completely baffled people who were around him. They were very awe-inspired, but also baffled as to the nature of, what an enlightened being the Buddha was. And very famously, after the Buddha became enlightened, the first person, he started walking, went on a long walk to find his friends. And the first person he met along the road, this man named Dana, looked at the Buddha, and he saw something really that amazed him, but he couldn't figure out what it was. He didn't have any categories, so he asked him, are you a yaksha? All these mythical characters. Are you a ghost? Are you a god? And the Buddha said no. He said, all ways of categorizing me, all ordinary conditions don't apply to me. So you can't categorize me in those slots. And even after he had many followers who gained insight, and I guess in a way you could say gained enlightenment themselves, and they saw there was something much, much greater about the Buddha that was at a much, much higher level that they had a hard time understanding. And so one approach was to make a myth that the Buddha must have been practicing over many lifetimes. So that was one way in of trying to understand who the Buddha was, how he could be this quite inexplicable presence and being. So that's one direction, one way of the Buddha was mythologized. And I think we talked about that in one of our previous sessions. The many stories of previous incarnations when he was heroic animals, or they were called the Jataka tales. But in the Buddha's lifetime, he made a distinction between himself as a Buddha, an enlightened being, and Buddhahood. So himself as a Buddha, he was a human being that probably reached the highest level a human being could reach. But that was in the context of time and space. But he also talked about Buddhahood. And Buddhahood, I guess, is how he embodied reality, which the true nature of reality, which is outside of time and space. And so these were known as, well, it started to be known as the two bodies of the Buddha. So there's a Buddha who was embodied as a human being, but there was also the Buddha who embodied reality. That was out, so the Buddha in time and the Buddha outside time. And, I'll just mention one story of, he taught for over 60 years, so he is the root of all Buddhist schools that we know today. But there's a famous story of a mass murderer who sized the Buddha up as his next victim. And he thought he was easy prey, he just thought he was a monk in a forest. But he just couldn't catch up to the Buddha. As hard he would try, he just couldn't catch up to the Buddha. The Buddha was just keep calmly walking along. And so finally, the criminal called out to the Buddha. He said, "Monk, stop." And the Buddha said, "I have stopped. When will you stop?" And in a way, there's many ways to read what the Buddha meant by "I have stopped." Well, but one way we could see it is he had stopped in creating going around in negative karma by doing harmful acts. He'd broken free of his conditioning. He'd broken free of a quite cyclical way of being into completely free, creative, spontaneous state of being, and attained Buddhahood, which was, wouldn't be within this ordinary sense of time and space. So at the time that the Buddha died, his physical body died, so he was, he did age as an old man, just like ordinary human beings. So one of those bodies was gone, but there was still this body of Buddhahood. So, which is beyond what we could conceive with our ordinary minds. But that it was still the way the Buddha was, one of the bodies of the Buddha. And shortly, within a few hundred years of the Buddha's death, something came in that was in between the Buddha as a human being and this Buddhahood outside of time and space. And that was known as the body of mutual enjoyment. I don't know why they call it that, but it was it's the archetypal or symbolic or idealized Buddha. And this was a way in to, for many practitioners, to imagine how to transcend our ordinary way of being and to connect with the qualities of Buddhahood. And it was also, after the Buddha died, they had no real depictions of what he looked like. In fact, there were no visual images of the Buddha after he died. The only images would maybe be the Buddha's footprint. But I guess simultaneously with this emergence of more symbolic, idealized kind of Buddhas, came the kind of image that we see all around us today in the West. This kind of image, this gold Buddha on the shrine, which I guess you wouldn't say is just an ordinary human being. It's quite idealized. I can't really say that the historical Buddha really looked like that. But it served a purpose of drawing our imagination into connecting with this Buddhahood. But what happened? With these symbols, I'll go back to one of the more significant symbols in a moment. But what happened over time, as Buddhism reached different cultures, is these images just exploded. So there were just thousands and thousands of images, and the historical Buddha, the Buddha who had a body, kind of got lost in some cultures. There was no reference to the historical Buddha who gave all those teachings. Or there would be teachings attributed to that Buddha that were, hundreds of years after he lived. So it became like a Buddha principle, more about Buddhahood than what we see as the Buddha. Now, our approach in Triratna is to go back to the original historic Buddha who gave us all these teachings, and because that's where Buddhism springs from, and that's where we can find the unifying principles through all these complex traditions and cultures. At the same time, there's a lot of value in getting to know a bit about some of these symbolic depictions or attempts to help us get a sense of this, who the Buddha was in terms of his enlightenment. And right in front of the shrine, I have this image. It's known as the 5 Buddha Mandala. And this was the first archetypal symbols that started coming up in India and very popular still in Tibet. And you could describe it as taking, enlightenment as a diamond in the rough, or a jewel, or as the Buddha first attained it, and then refining it and refracting it into different colors and jewels. So there are 5 Buddhas in that image, and each one represents a different aspect of the Buddha's enlightenment. And as symbols can take us into a place, so we have quite universal things that we can respond to emotionally, such as colors. So the colors we might have different association with colors. There are different directions in space. So there's they times of day as well, and there's each one of them can relate to episodes in the historical Buddha's life, and it's very, very rich symbolism. But I'll mention just one or two things that quite distinctive and particular to Buddhism, and one is the hand gesture, or mudra. And that seemed to be almost to symbolize a being that is so attained that he's enlightened down to his fingertips, and it makes a certain gesture. This hand makes a certain gesture. And the red Buddha, I have a couple of these symbolic Buddhas on the shrine. So the red Buddha, he has his hands in a meditation gesture. He has deep meditative absorption, which is a very important aspect of enlightenment. And another, the green Buddha, holds his hand up in a gesture of fearlessness. So it's a quality of unobstructed success, fearlessness. There's the yellow Buddha. So I have a small figure of that Buddha here, and his hand is out in a gesture of supreme enlightenment, and a supreme generosity. And he's known, this Buddha, this is the Buddha of the South. He's also associated with jewel, because there's something about the preciousness of the jewel and the teachings being of what's of true value. And he's a Buddha of abundance, so there's jewels and beauty. And there's a blue Buddha who makes a gesture of touching the earth, and that relates to the period when the Buddha was becoming enlightened. So it was they estimate a probably 7-week period where there was a mythical figure that was trying to get him to have a lot of doubts about, who do you think you are to attain supreme enlightenment. And the Buddha he touched the earth, and he called the earth goddess to witness. And so it was like, in a way, it's kind of having, this gesture is kind of a confidence in one's practice, or a confidence in what he had achieved. And so that's a very, and it's also associated with imperturbability, equanimity. And the other aspect I'll mention, which are quite significant in terms of contemplating enlightenment, or a way of contemplating, is the different wisdoms. So the generous Buddha of supreme generosity has the wisdom of equality. So seeing what's universal in all phenomena. So that's the wisdom of equality. And this Buddha has discriminating wisdom, which sees the universality and the unity in phenomena, but also can see its unique qualities. So that's so it's quite a koan. And the blue Buddha is associated with water, and it's reflective, mirror-like wisdom. So just really reflecting back reality the way it is. And the green Buddha is wisdom is unobstructive success. So this incredible power, energy that comes with enlightenment, sometimes symbolized by a union of opposites. And in the center is the Buddha associated, probably with the historical Buddha, and he holds a wheel in his hands, and that refers to an incident of the Buddha's life when he gave his first teaching, and it was known as turning the wheel of the Dharma. So, we don't have the Buddha living with us. We don't have a photograph of him. We have many words he gave, but we have these beautiful, very deeply meaningful symbols as a way to something to contemplate, as a way to, they're like a doorway to something that transcends our ordinary way of seeing things. And they can be, a very, very valuable way of assimilating these 3 different levels of the Buddha. And also to understand how, different cultures might have, and traditions have focused maybe more on these in-between symbols and not so much on the historic Buddha. So I'll leave it there, and I'll turn to my friend Amaladana. Maybe we'll have a bit of a chat.
Thanks, Pushpa.
You're welcome, Amaladana.
I love the doorway.
Yes.
Is a nice sort of concept. I was thinking that as you were talking, and it's that sometimes these archetypal Buddhas, there are things that seem to invite you in.
Yes.
And you can sort of go in and explore various qualities or characteristics, can't you? Maybe depending on something in your personality, but maybe just something about how you are at that particular moment.
Oh yes, that's very true. I mean, I've been always drawn to this red Buddha, so that's from my shrine, because I always had an ideal of universal love and compassion. So that's the quality he's associated with. So that was always. But he also dwells in what's known as the realm of the hungry ghosts. So these beings that have big bellies and tiny mouths, and can never, they're always trying to satisfy themselves, sort of grasping at things. And I just feel that's an area I've worked on in life, and it just is interesting how I found such an affinity with this Buddha.
Is that something that's always been with you? Is it something you followed through in your sort of career in Buddhism, if you
Yeah,
like.
I'd say so. Yeah, I guess this kind of a feeling of lack. I suppose that could be, like I think a hungry ghost. It's a really amazing symbol. It's this feeling of never getting enough, never feeling full or loved or lovable, and then this, which has certainly changed over the years, but and yeah, not finding satisfaction in a lot of ways I was relating to people, but at the same time really yearning for this ideal of unlimited love and compassion that I was seeking spiritually, and that was one thing that really inspired me. I was very inspired by Mother Teresa at one point, or great Buddhist teachers who really embodied compassion and love. You could just see it in their faces. So it's
there is that. The visual thing is really important,
Yeah.
isn't it? I mean, I think a lot of the Buddhist images, there's a sort of a power or confidence in the postures and a peace.
That's right.
And another worldliness that
Yeah.
sort of comes across, isn't
Yeah.
there? And I love that earth touching.
Yes, gesture, mudra. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that sort of says it's just such a confident act, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to actually, but I didn't really, I've seen lots and lots of rupas, statues like that. But it's only when I sort of read this sort of story of the Buddha and how he became enlightened and how he, as you said, he touched the earth and the earth goddess, basically confirmed, acknowledged him and confirmed him.
Yes. Yes.
Both to himself and to
Yes.
Yeah. And that then became such a strong symbol as much as the power of the posture.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the earth goddess, because I always cringe a little when I mention goddesses and Buddhas and and they because I kind of had rejected my Catholic faith because I just thought these were all they weren't real things, like I really I had to believe things had to be solid and concrete to be real or scientifically measured, and and I lost the symbolic aspect of them, and I could almost feel my Western prejudice, that this is kind of childish to still believe in gods and but it was very particular to that culture at that time, but since I've been contemplating these symbols and then also learning more about I think there's a prejudice in Western culture that unless it's solid and material, that's the most important thing in life. Whereas there's so many intangible things that are very important, such as morality or, different, you can't really pin them down in a concrete way. And the Buddha always said he didn't worry about whether things existed or didn't exist. It was more about things rising and falling away. So, what are conditions that help us make progress? So, dwelling on one of these figures, it doesn't matter whether they exist or don't exist. So maybe they hover somewhere in the middle of that. But it's more about, how our imagination engages with us. Does it help us evolve as human beings? I quite like that approach.
Yeah. Well, it does open this sort of incredible sort of landscape, isn't it, for the imagination?
Yeah.
But we have these conditions, particularly Western conditions, where things need to be scientifically observable.
That's right.
I've several times, in my experience, I've surprised myself in that I'm quite accepting of the more mythological side, whereas I haven't always been.
No.
But in a sense, it helps me better express what I actually feel about things.
Yeah.
And I can't express my feelings always with scientific formula.
That's right. Yeah.
And these some of these images and symbols, they sort of help me move closer to things.
Do you think they get you past, just being locked into a conceptual way of seeing things?
Yeah, although you can get, my sort of psyche sort of says that I can also get locked into it the way an image should be as well, and what it means, So sometimes I sort of need to sort of let loose a little bit around the images. And there's, as you say, the word doorway I think is really good.
Yeah.
Because it's like something which draws something in you out, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess the thing is it helpful? Do you resonate with it or not? Or does it open up something? And I think one cautionary thing is it's good to learn about these figures, but not to worry about being too literal about what all the details are and getting it right. It's is there something about it that one aspect that might help you in meditation to open up to something beyond the mundane? Yeah.
I was thinking when you started, was it Dona?
Oh, Dona, yes.
I remember. So he was taken just by the presence of the Buddha, wasn't he?
That's right.
Often
yeah.
you hear that, don't you? People are just in awe of his sort of an aura around him. And it's nice, we can't see that, but we can sort of imagine it.
Yeah.
But I like when another member of the Sri Ratna, Padmavajra, he was giving a talk, and he said, Dona talked to the Buddha, and he sort of said, "Oh yeah, so you're beyond a god. You're nothing. You've gone beyond everything that's describable, have you?" He goes, "Okay," and he didn't really believe him, basically.
Yeah.
And he said he walked away from the Buddha and out of the Pali canon.
Yeah, that's right.
In other words, he was never mentioned again because he's It's really funny. But I do sort of in a way I find it difficult sometimes personally trying to think of the Buddha as a real in the human form.
Yeah.
But partly because, as you say, we don't have any images, and so but there are sort of meditations, aren't there, where you can actually try to bring him to mind in a sort of heartfelt way, rather than in a literal way.
You bring his qualities to mind, and and I've been on pilgrimage in India, and just seeing where he lived and taught, brings, and for me particular, I'm very inspired by the Buddha as a human being. So when I come across traditions where he doesn't even get a look in, and there are all these more mythological things, I think, what happened to the Buddha? But it is still Buddhahood, and a lot of them are very consistent with what the Buddha originally taught. It's just I guess it's more the Theravadan tradition that stays more with the historical Buddha, and maybe that's more my inclination.
Yeah, I mean, I think different people have different sort of focuses, don't they? Or the different doorways that they go through. And I don't know where I am actually. I think I'm moving back to the Buddha from the theological things. I'm, in a sense, I find it in terms of approaching him in my imagination. It's like there's a sort of shyness about it, and it's getting less shy, but but there's some sort of feeling like that. But I do love the idea of these really serious practitioners and probably brilliant people who just in places like Nalanda, it's like a Buddhist university, wasn't it? One of the biggest academic places in the world at the time, and how they would study the teachings of the Buddha, and they would come up with these images, wouldn't they? They'd come up with these different symbols and images, and I just love the idea of them going into their minds and expressing and articulating these sort of really deep feelings, and leaving them there for us to follow on with.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're sort of not difficult. They're difficult to to understand in their entirety. You just have to sort of walk slowly
I think I guess we need a balance between learning about them, but also finding what resonates for us, and what sparks our imagination. And our teacher said we need to make some kind of imaginative connection with the Buddha, his transcendental aspect of the Buddha. So to find an image or some kind, or even a sound symbol like mantra is one way of evoking that. Yeah. So, thank you. Shall we leave it at that?
Great, so I hope you enjoyed that Dharma Night talk. So if you did enjoy it, if you're enjoying our videos, I just want to ask you or encourage you to think about making a donation to the Brixton Buddhist community. We're a UK charity that relies completely on your donations to run everything here. And if this was a class, a meditation class, there'd be a donation bowl that you could just put in £10 at the end of the night to help support the activities. But as you're watching this online, I just want to ask you to think about making an online donation. If you've watched 4 or 5 videos this month, maybe you might want to think about giving £10. So there's a link in the description below where you can go to our website and make a donation. And if you want to keep giving, you don't want to worry about making that donation every month, well, you could just set up a standing order, a monthly standing order. That would be really, really helpful. I want to suggest something of the region of maybe £10 or £20 a month if you're able to do that. And that would be really, really helpful and help us keep producing videos like this one. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourself.